Yeah, I think it started recording. Okay, with that being said, please introduce yourself for everyone watching.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Wong. I'm a third year at UC Berkeley studying political science and global studies, um, and I go by she, her pronouns.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Stephanie. Please tell us what do you do? Like, what do you do? Where are you from, etc.
Sounds good. I was born in San Francisco and I moved to the Greater Bay Area. Though my family is from Hong Kong and I speak fluent Cantonese, I speak the language with my family. See, I also, um, as for what I do, I currently serve as an ASUC senator for UC Berkeley, the Associated Students of the University of California. And outside, I'm involved in a lot of sort of government work, nonprofit work, and advocacy as well, with a specific focus on the Asian American community.
Oh, that is wonderful, Stephanie. Please get into it with us. Like, tell us about the work that you do. Tell us about how your own AAPI identity and experiences influence the work that you do.
Absolutely. I think the best way to kick this off is with my current work as an ASUC senator. So when I ran, I decided to run on something I personally believe in, which is something for everyone. And I found it sort of unique. At Berkeley, what you usually do is run based on your community interests. And obviously, I wanted to keep as much as everyone's interests in mind. And that was not only difficult, but I found it a very rewarding experience, frankly. I really wanted to focus on the Asian American community at Cal during my campaign and in my work, just because I see a lot of issues underneath that have yet to be addressed. And I have not seen anyone, frankly, to be quite honest, addressing these in the Senate thus far. I actually heard from someone a really interesting piece of information. I'm apparently the first ASUC senator to
Yes.
be Hong Kong descent, which is incredibly interesting and incredibly overdue. Um, so that was really nice. And some of the issues that I'm seeing is there's a lot of sort of number one, everyone believes that the AAPI community is a monolith when that is not true at all. You have, West Asians, Southeast Asians, South Asians, East Asians, Pacific Islanders, and not to mention Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians. They span across over 54 islands. We're talking about Melanesians, Polynesians, and Micronesians, right? And so we're an incredibly diverse group, and that really does get overlooked at Berkeley, especially when resources are being distributed, and issues and platforms are being discussed. So that's one thing. I really wanted to bring the AA and HPI community together, especially after the traumatic event, especially this year with the coronavirus pandemic and the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. And how we've been approaching our work is through solidarity building, first and foremost. We recognize that there is a lot of work to be done in making those cross-cultural connections and connecting with primarily RSOs who serve the interests of different groups of students within the AA and HPI community. So that is the bulk of our work for this first semester, and I'm really proud to say that we've made strides. And I was really happy to see that multiple different ethnic groups within the AA and HPI community showed up for the Filipinx community when the Doe Library produced a frankly racist display glorifying white colonizers
Yeah.
during American Heritage Month. And it was really heartening to see, Indian Student Association reposting our graphic and encouraging students to come out. I'm aware that, another RSO with cultural roots sent their members in. And personally, I spoke about how Bolt College, formerly, or Bolt, which was the former Berkeley Law School, Bolt was a huge racist who advocated for the exclusion of Chinese. I talked about how his unnaming, but his remaining presence on campus is just the same to,
Yeah.
What with Joe and Krober, Moses, along with so many others. So that's one piece of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe you are making great strides, and we do appreciate the difference you brought. Like being an ASUC senator, like it's so nice seeing like like AAPI representation in the Senate as well. Like as a student myself, like it's nice to see. And so thank you so much for like all the work that you do. But you mentioned how like with the rise in Asian hate crimes, like the Asian American like umbrella is not like a monolith as it is regularly projected as, especially during these times. Like I often see like the grouping under the Asian American umbrella, and it's constantly like ignoring the diversity, ignoring the different cultures within like the term Asian American, quote unquote. So with the increase in Asian American hate crimes and anti-Asian hate and discrimination, were there any strategies and approaches that worked for you before that don't work now? Is there any like new strategies that you incorporated because of the recent pandemic?
Absolutely. I really want to tackle the second part of that question first, which is what new strategies did we learn? Number one, breaking down the data. Disaggregating the data is hugely important, not only for assessing, you know, anti-Asian hate crimes, but also who is getting those top spots in employment, who is earning less to a dollar, and etc. When we disaggregate the data, we find that number one, income is hugely important. It is probably one of the most important determinants for whether you will be a target of an anti-Asian hate crime. And the reason is because, for example, the urban Chinatowns. It is a hugely dense population where poverty very high due to gentrification as well as other factors. We see a lot of hate crimes occurring there, and there's a targeting due to income, right? People there tend to be more vulnerable, unfortunately, and that gets taken advantage of. We also see that hate crimes are not dispersed evenly across the AA-NHPI subgroups. For example, we've seen that most of the hate crimes have been targeted towards East Asians, primarily Chinese, but also East Asian, so a lot of Thai in those statistics, unfortunately. Whereas we see that Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians, they haven't experienced this recent spike of violence, but that does not mean at all they haven't experienced violence, from the militarization of the islands up to now, present day. One example of the violence that they're experiencing can be seen in the ongoing water crisis that's going on, which I highly encourage everyone to do some research about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Like with disaggregating the data, like is one of your new strategies. I think that's also very important because it like takes into account all the disparities that are being like missed and stuff. So were there any strategies and approaches that worked before, but they didn't work now?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I think one of the strategies that was heavily relied on by, people outside of the community, and even within the community, was this notion that, oh, well, Asian Americans just remain silent. And so we don't hear them, right? And I too once believed in that notion. I thought, well, a lot of people in my community, they tend to just mind their own business. They tend to say, let's keep moving on. It'll bring less trouble to myself. But a lot, a lot has happened since then that has definitely changed my worldview. And one of those occurrences is through speaking with my mother about all of this, right? And how she's been feeling. She's a first generation immigrant from Hong Kong. She speaks Cantonese way more fluently than she does English. And she's been fearing for her life too. And we were talking about this, and she said, Stephanie, it's not about Asian Americans being silent, but it's about, is anyone hearing us? And that left a very deep impact and impression on me. And I realized that she was correct. Is anyone even listening to us? Right? I think recently there are more and more people listening to us in politics and government, and across work sectors. But prior to that, no. So I think we really need to unlearn this notion of Asian Americans are silent. No, that is a cultural stereotype that's been forced upon us. We're actually speaking up very loudly, but the other side also needs to listen.
Yes, I totally agree. And that was so well put, Stephanie. Thank you so much for that. But yeah, like I agree. I feel like right now we're more loud than ever, but we weren't just barely starting to speak. Like we're just even louder. We're pressing to get heard. And it's during these moments that I feel like our voices needed the most to be heard. But I do agree, like in some families and communities, there has been an approach of keeping your head down and a heavy emphasis on like assimilation. Growing up, my parents would always tell me like, oh, like go to school, like be good, like don't cause any problems, like don't cause any problems with someone else, like just keep your head down. Like, do you have any ideas to address this barrier or this challenge?
Mhm. I think a large part of it comes from the language barrier, right? This notion that we're silent. Well, we're speaking out, but some of us are speaking out in our native languages, and that communication does not um, get get translated across to the other side. So I think that there has been this renewed need for mediators, young
Yes.
people speak, both English and their native language to help bridge that gap and mitigate that barrier and close that barrier.
Yes. I see a lot of like movements are not only being done outside, but also on social media. And I feel like it's so widespread, especially with Gen Z. They're more active now than ever. And it's such a great thing to see. But I feel like, what about those that are not as adapted to the technology? Like, so how can we start conversations about anti-Asian hate with our families and our community members?
Absolutely. I think there's also somewhat of an impetus on each of us to really, reach out to our own elderly family members and elderly in the community. What happens a lot, and this is a trend that I've noticed since I was young, is that um, a lot of the elderly in our Asian communities, they sort of get left behind for one reason or another. And it's incredibly sad and disheartening to see. I see a lot of great community and social programs out there where young people or anyone of any age, frankly, can get involved with meal distribution, can get involved with community safety initiatives. Compassion Oakland is a great initiative where a bunch of volunteers go out and basically walk with seniors to their desired location. And that's how they build community. Another great way is just simply by, going into a home and playing chess with them or talking to them, and providing them with some sort of comfort.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Stephanie. Thank you. Here at Voss, I feel like we do align with your goals as well. As an ASUC senator, like our goal is to challenge that exact cultural norm of staying like quote unquote silent about our social and cultural issues and our struggles. And what are some ways like on the individual level and on the community level that we could challenge this cultural norm? Like as an ASUC senator, how have you personally approached this?
Mhm. Absolutely. We definitely understand that Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have not been heard enough on this campus and outside everywhere. And so something that I'm really excited to push forward in the spring semester is a town hall. And this town hall would invite members of the community for not only solidarity building through like activities and food, but we also hope that this mini one-day conference can be a safe space where people can express their concerns with either how the school is operating or how funding is distributed for their cultural RSOs, or how they need more money, frankly, for the initiatives that they're pursuing, which is a common problem that I've heard reoccurring. I know that a lot of Asian American NHPI, so Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander RSOs, are doing amazing work on things like retention, breaking the school to prison pipeline. I know that is something that the Southeast Asian community is working on. And frankly, these initiatives don't get enough attention nor enough funding
Yes.
because of the stereotypes that are imposed on us. Um,
No, yeah. Speaking of stereotypes, on the note of that, I know like with the AAPI community, we're often labeled as the model minority, but we never accepted that label. It was kind of placed upon us as like a weapon to pit POC against POC. And I feel like with the model minority myth, our grief is often made invisible. So how do you suppose we could work to deconstruct that model minority myth that stereotypes AAPI community as what we talked about, the silent minority?
That's a great question. And that's a question that my office and I personally am still tackling with as so many members of our community. But I think definitely the first step is reaching out and working on solidarity efforts with other racial and ethnic communities. I think I cannot stress that enough. Oftentimes we focus so much on what divides us instead of what unites us, right?
Yes.
And that if we focus on the latter aspect, we can not only draw a lot of connections, but we can also support each other from the ground up. And that's how I think we break the model minority myth. And it's really unfortunate that the responsibility falls on us to break this
Yes.
when we didn't ask for this, when we were forced into this position. But there's a lot of work that also needs to be done on our part.
No, yes, I totally agree. I feel like with everything going on, I still see the notions of our grief being made invisible. Like growing up in like history textbook, like US history curriculum, I feel like there's always like certain biases of the story like arising, especially because like for in my case, like I'm Vietnamese, and so my parents would tell me stories about like the Vietnam War, like their struggles coming over here. But then when I would go to school, I would see like the US lens of the Vietnam War. And so how do you suppose we could make the invisibility of like AAPI's grief visible, especially with all like the different cultures and the disparities? How do we make ourselves known in our own individuals?
Mhm. Absolutely. I absolutely love that you brought up your own heritage and experiences as a Vietnamese person. And I think that this leads into another point about relearning our authentic histories. Um, we definitely need to break out of this Western lens through which we learn pretty much
Yes.
everything, even at Berkeley, and instead opt for books and materials that are written by authors who re-authentically tell our genuine history. And I'm not referring
Sorry.
to, you're good, I'm not just referring to, Vietnamese history, right? But I'm also referring to the legacy of Vietnamese American history. What have the solidarity efforts of Vietnamese Americans and Vietnamese here been so far? And so I think that could be really powerful.
No, yes, I totally agree with you as well on that note. Like, please get into it with me, like as an ASUC senator, what goes on behind the scenes. I feel like we do see your like movement building online, and I think it's such a wonderful thing to see. But I feel like no one really knows the work you like do put in sometimes. Like, so please tell us like what goes on behind the scenes when you're like pushing the like fighting for us, like when you're pushing the stereotypes away, like policy making, like please tell us about that.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. I'll first touch on the general, and then I'll bring in,
Uh,
this
yeah.
example of the next rally, which again I will always reiterate was a success due to the work of activists like Alex Mabanta, the Filipinx Graduate Student Association, as well as other Filipinx undergrad org, including LFS, PASS, and whatnot. So it was all of them. I was just there to support them. But generally, what I do in a day of a senator is number one, you attend a lot of meetings. And even in those meetings, I find myself advocating hard for the communities that I represent. Whether it's with another official from the ASUC or with the administration, there's always some sort of fight um, to be had, especially when administration is not too is a bit reluctant to immediately put their money and time in supporting initiatives that go towards the well-beings of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. That is definitely an issue that I've discovered. But even having those conversations and being in the room with them and bringing up those topics and putting immediate pressure on them right then and there, that is already the first step. The second step usually, if this is something that we really want to pursue, really want to see, and there's great pushback from administration or someone else, that's when we usually try to strategize other ways with my team. For example, launching a social media campaign to really amp the pressure on and to really amplify and say, hey, these are the voices of your students, this is what they want. I wasn't involved with this as an ASUC senator, but I remember a great example of amping up the pressure could be the library campaign to save the Southeast Asian Library. That was an initiative that several students put up, and it was successful. Admin was trying to turn that into office space, and students were like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
We need to preserve our history. And so the library stayed and is here until this day. Another big thing that senators do is write legislation, and legislation can either be written to make a statement or to amend some of the bylaws. And so far, I've been dabbling in a little bit of both, but I definitely hope to lean more towards the latter so that students can obtain the resources more easily that they need for next semester.
That's great, Seth. What I'm hearing is like, I feel like a lot of your campaign and all of your work stems from mobilizing community members. I feel like that's so beautiful and like POC allyship at the same time. So moving forward, like what strategies and approaches do you suggest, like how can we mobilize our community members in these efforts and while at the same time including other racial and ethnic groups and policymakers to address anti-Asian hate and discrimination?
Absolutely. So this is definitely when I would like to bring in the example of the protests against Doe. Fun fact, Alex and I pulled that in 5 days. We pulled that together in 5 days, and we did not think we were going to make it at all. In fact, it was all Alex who basically pushed me saying, we need to do this now, we need to do this now. And I'm very, very glad I listened to him. Because it definitely ramped up a lot of pressure on the admin. So I think one of the strategies is just to listen, frankly. If I hadn't listened to Alex, I would have made a fatal mistake, and I wouldn't have been able to support LFS and the Filipinx community in the ways that they felt they should have been supported. That's definitely number one. Number two, I also think that just reaching out means a lot to people. It shows that you care, that you want to hear what they have to say. And, in a space where there's so much talking done, there needs to be more listening.
Yes, I agree. I feel like you mentioned how like often when even you have a seat at the table with these policymakers and you're talking to admin about funding these like groups who like are not getting as much traction, as much attention as they need to for the important work that they do. How do you suppose we could practice allyship for other minorities to also get a seat at the table in a sense, in a broader scheme?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What I try to do when I have a seat at the table is I try to bring up other conversations I have with people that could be useful here. And I say, hey, I have this amazing friend named so forth, and, they have this great initiative that's going on. They've expressed similar concerns. Why don't I bring them to the next meeting, right? It's not just about occupying the space on the table, but making space at the table for others and bringing others along up with you, so that there is not only more solidarity being generated, but there's actually, a productive conversation that's going on that starts with the primary source, the grassroots.
No, yes. I love that you mentioned how like it's not even about having a seat at the table anymore. It's about making that space. And I feel like in this time, like that is so important because before I feel like when someone else is at the table, another POC representing, like that's amazing because that's another stride that we have a chance to be at that table. It's like when one eats, we all are able to eat, and that's still true. But I think it's so important that you mentioned the making the space. So like beyond that, how do you think as an individual like me or like another community member or like just another student or another person, like how can we practice allyship when say we do not have such a seat at the table?
Mm-hmm. I would say be inclusive as much as possible. Definitely, there will be people who, as we've seen with the model minority myth, there will be
Yes.
people who try to pit people against one another by, placing buffers or saying, oh no, we have limited capacity at this table, right? There are a lot of different ways that you can go around that. Sometimes constraints are constraints and we have to deal with that. But that doesn't mean that you cannot still make space in other ways. So making space would look like, just name dropping people in the conversation or referring them, or maybe, even talking to those people and saying, you know, hey, I'm working on this issue, I'm working on this challenge, I need help tackling it. Would you like to help? I think you would be a great ally to this cause. I do have to let you know and be transparent. This is behind the scenes, and see where it goes from there. But I think that if you have the intention to be inclusive of people, it will show.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. It was nice hearing like how like what you do behind the scenes, like the work that you do. Like it's all nice to like see all of that as well. Like so we actually blew through all my questions. So that was really quick. Thank you so much. I mean, is there anything last words you would like to say to everyone watching? Any final thoughts? Words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom, words of wisdom. Oh, you flatter me too much, Marilyn. Thank you so much. Just thank you for providing me with the platform to talk about my experiences and talk about how we can build more solidarity with our communities and how we can go forward from here. And I hope everyone has a safe and restful winter break. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm gonna end the recording right here.